Sorry, it's been a few weeks. Right. Turl sat in his dark hole and was gloomy. He was not with the other silos. They would have torn him to fur fluffs. He was here in a cubicle that had once been used for cleaning supplies on the dormitories. It had been rigged with a breathe gas circulator. It contained a narrow, 12-foot-long bed. There was a little port that had been rigged to push food through. One could see the outside corridor beyond its revolving planes, and there was a two-way intercom inset below the door. The place was strong enough. He had already tried every means of opening it, but no escape. He was not chained, but every hour of the day and night there was a sentry with an assault rifle just outside. It was really the fault of the females, both the animal females and Chirk. His hindsight was a bit faulty, but not his conviction, and he knew he was correct. Always a master of self-delusion, Turl was at his best these days. When he compared his present lot with the beautiful dream of being wealthy and powerful on Silo, being bowed to by the royalty and trembled at by everyone else, he quivered with suppressed rage. These animals were denying him his due. 10 beautiful gold coffins lay mouldering in the company cemetery upon Silo. Of that he was utterly certain. The delicious thought of slipping out there some dark night and exhuming them was second only to the thought of the wealth and power that would ensue. He had befriended these animals, and how had they treated him? A mop closet. But Turl was nothing if not clever. He roused himself now and began to think hard and brightly. Now was the time to be a calm, cool, a masterful Turl. He would get to Silo. He would get these animals and this planet destroyed. Finally and forever. He would dig up those coffins, and he would be bowed to and trembled at. Nothing must stand in his way. He began to tally up the bits and scraps of leverage he had. First, of course, it went without saying that his own cleverness was his chief asset. He agreed with himself on that, of course, and secondly, he was almost certain the first animal he had caught had forgotten there was a hefty charge of explosive left buried in that cage. Third, there had been 3 remotes. One was still in his office. One had been seized, and the third was just inside that cage door, just in case he somehow got tricked or trapped to be in there. That third one would enable him to blow up the females or shut off the power to the bars, and he was certain it had not been found. The fourth piece of leverage was a pretty big one, and, well, the fifth, that was gigantic. Leverage. Sitting there in the semi-dark, he thought and thought, and after several days he knew he had it. Every point in its tortuous pattern of events was perfectly channeled, perfectly conceived and ready to be put in train. The primary stage was to get himself put in that cage. Good. He would do it. So as that very mild, personable Turl noted one morning that the sentries no longer wore kilts. Gazing out through the revolving panes of the food slot, he carefully concealed his elation. He sized the creature up. It had long pants, or as we call them in the human world, trousers, strapped boots, and halfwing insignia on its left breast. Turl might be a top graduate of company schools, but he was no linguist. That was part of the arts, and what self-respecting silo had anything to do with those? So an element of luck had to enter in here. "What?" says Turl, and Silo through the intercom and sawed in the door. "Does that half-wing stand for?" The sentry looked a bit startled. Oh, this was good, thought Turl. "I should have thought it would have 2 wings. "That's for a full pilot," said the sentry. "I'm just a student pilot, but I have my full wings some day." Turl laid down his conviction that you couldn't understand animals, while arrogance demanded non-recognition of them. Necessity demanded he recognize them. This thing was talking Silo. Chinko accent, as would be expected, but still silo. I am sure you'll earn your wings, says Turtle. I must say your silo is excellent. You should practice it more, though. You could talk into a real silo would help. The sentry brightened up. Suddenly he realized that was perfectly true. And here was a real silo. He had never talked to one before. It was quite a novelty. So he told Turtle who he was, and that being easy to discuss, and he said he was Lars Thornson, part of the Swedish contingent, although for some reason he's going to have an Irish accent, because he's a baddie, and had just arrived some months ago for pilot training. He did not share the ferocity of some of the Scots against the silos, for his people way up in the Arctic, or Irelandic, hadn't had any previous contact with silos. He thought maybe the Scots exaggerated things a bit. And by the way, was Turtle a flyer? Oh yes, Turtle told him, and he was quite true. Turtle was a past master in all types of flight. Battle tactics, stunt flying, right up into the 5-mile deep mine shafts and picking out endangered machines, and the sentry had drawn closer. Flight was very dear to him, and here was a master. He said that their best flyer was Johnny. And did Turtle know him? Oh, yes, says Turtle. Not did he know him, but back in the olden days before there had been a bit of a misunderstanding, he himself had taught that one a few tricks. It was why he was such a good flyer. A very fine creature, actually. Turtle had been his firmest friend. Turtle was elated. These were cadet sentries, standing watches in addition to their schooling, to ease a considerable load on the regular personnel. For several days each morning, Lars Thornton improved his silo and learned the ins and outs of combat flying from the master and a one-time friend of Johnny's. He was quite unaware that if he put some of these tricks into use, he would lose the most elementary fight in the air, and later others would have to shake the nonsense out of him before he got himself killed. Turtle knew well it was a risk to play this trick, but he just couldn't resist it. Turtle corrected the sentry silo up to a point, and then one morning he said to himself, well, he would have to exactly clarify certain words, and really they should have a dictionary. There were lots of dictionaries, and so the next morning the sentry gave him one. Well, hey, with considerable glee, Turtle went to work on the dictionary when the sentry was off duty. There were a lot of words in the composite language called silo that were never actually used by silos. They had leaked into the language from Chinko and other tongues. Silos never used them because they could not really grasp the conceptual meaning. So Turtle looked up words and phrases like atone for wrongs, guilt, restitution, personal fault, pity, cruelty, just, amends. He knew that these words existed and that other alien races used them, but it was a very, very hard job. And later he would look back on this as the toughest part of the whole project. It was all so foreign, so completely, totally, and utterly alien. Soon Turtle was satisfied that he was ready to enter his next stage. You know, he said to the sentry one morning, I feel very guilty about putting your poor Johnny in a cage. Actually, I have a craving to atone for my wrongs. It was my personal fault that he was subjected to such cruelty, and I wish with all my heart to make amends. I am overwhelmed by guilt, and I pity him for what I did, and it would only be just if I made restitution for it by suffering in a cage just like he did. It made Turtle perspire to get it all out, but that only added to his contrite, constipated look. The sentry had made a habit of recording their conversations, for he studied them later and corrected his own pronunciation. And since he had never heard a lot of these words in his silo before, he was glad he had it all on disc. Turtle was also glad it had been an agonizing performance. The sentry, having the evening free, digested all of this, and he decided he had better report it to the compound commanding officer. There was a new compound commander, an Argyle, very well noted for his prowess in raids in earlier days and very experienced, but not in America. The ease with which a radiation bullet could blow up a silo had given him a bit of contempt for them in their current state, and, well, he had a problem of his own. Literal mobs of people from all over the world got off planes and took tours of the compounds. The coordinators showed them around and pointed out where this had happened and where that had happened, many-hued and many-tongued, and they were a bit of a nuisance, really, and almost every one of them wanted to be shown a silo. Most had never seen one, no matter what they had been so oppressed by them for so many years and centuries and thousands of years. Some very important chiefs and dignitaries had enough whip with the council to get special permission, and that meant an extra detail of guards the commander did not have. It meant talking to people and taking people down to the dormitory levels where they should not be. It actually meant a bit of danger for them, for some of these silos down there was still not quite reconstructed. Interesting how all these Americanish cultures have reconstructed, re-educated. Anybody think they were communist? Enough about Jewish people. So the commander toyed with the idea. He went out and looked at the cage. Evidently, it could be wired. In fact, it was wired, with plenty of voltage to the bars. If one could put a protector in front so people could not touch the bars and get hurt, he would be relieved of these nonsense tours into the dormitory. Further, it appealed to him to have a monkey in a cage. It would help morale, and it would also be an added attraction. He could plainly see that somebody might want to make restitution and to do amends, so he mentioned it sketchily to a council meeting. They were very busy and had their minds set on other things, and he omitted to tell them it was Turl. Technicians checked to make sure that the cage wiring was live and could be shut off easily from the outside where the connections and box had been fastened to a pole, and that a barrier was erected to keep people from electrocuting themselves. It was a very elated but carefully downcast Turl who was then escorted under heavy guard and put in Johnny's and the girls' own cage. "Ah, the sky again," says Turl. He hated the blue sky of Earth like poison gas, but I must take no pleasure in it. Oh, it is only just that I be confined here, exposed to public view and ridicule. He had looked up some new words and mocked. It serves me right to be mocked. And so Turl went about his duty looking very honestly, and the crowds came, and he looked ferocious and leaped around, glaring at them through his breathed mask glass and making little children scream and flinch outside the barricade. He had heard guerrillas, beasts over in Africa, beating their chest, so he beat his chest. I'm glad he didn't find out what the black men were doing over in Africa. Give him a razor blade and a baby. He was a real hit. The crowds came. They saw an actual silo. They even threw things at him. They had heard that he had put Johnny in a cellar, and young Lars visited him one day and told him, through the bars, that the crowd wanted to know where his collar was. Turl thought it was a great idea. A couple of days later, 5 guards came in and put a heavy iron collar and chain on him, and he fastened him to the old stake. The compound commander was quite happy about it, but he told the guards that if Turl showed any sign of trying to escape, they were to riddle him. Turl's mouth bones wore a private smile as he capered and postured. He rumbled and roared. His plans were working, and they were working out perfectly. Johnny threw the book from him and pushed his way, lunch far from him, untouched. The guard at the door looked in through the glass, abruptly alert. Colonel Ivan whirled in an automated response. Combat ready. It sounded like the thud of a grenade for a moment. "It makes no sense," says Johnny. "It just makes no sense." The others, seeing it was no emergency, well, they relaxed. The sentry returned to his usual position, and the colonel went on wiping down the white tile. But Chrissy remained alarmed. It was almost unheard of for Johnny to be irritable, and for days and days now, ever since he had started to do nothing but study books. Silo books they seemed to be, though she could not read, because she's only a girl. He had been getting much worse and worse and worse. The untouched lunch worried her. It was venison stew with wild herbs, cooked especially for him by Aunt Ellen. Weeks ago she had rushed to the old base to give him a glad and relieved greeting and to tell him that, though her fears for him had almost come true, here he was, alive. She had stood around suffused with delight until she suddenly realized that they were feeding him crap. The old village was only a few miles away down the pass, with either personally or through a small boy mounted on one of the horses, or being mounted by a horse, they are Scottish. Johnny had left. Aunt Ellen routinely sent him his favourite dishes to be warmed up and served from the hospital galley. The boy or Aunt Ellen usually waited to take back the utensils, and when Aunt Ellen saw the food had not been touched, she would be very upset. Chrissy vowed to get the sentry to eat some of the maybe gobble a few bites herself from not gobble the sentry because she's a good girl. Just to gobble some of the food. It wouldn't be polite to send back an untouched venison stew. Had he been able to walk easily, Johnny would have gone over and kicked the book. Normally he had a vast respect for books, but not this one. It had several similar texts that were all the subject of mathematics or teleportation. They seemed incomprehensible. That's a really long word. Silo arithmetic was bad enough. Johnny supposed that because Silos had 6 talents on the right paws, 5 on the left, that they must be from the Isle of Man. That they had all to go and choose 11 as their base. All their mathematics were structured around the number 11. Johnny had been told that human mathematics employed a decimal system involving 10 as the radix. He wouldn't know. He only had ever known silo mathematics, but these mathematics of teleportation soared above normal silo arithmetic. The book he had just thrown down had begun to give him a headache, and these days his headaches had almost vanished. The book was called Elementary Principles of Integral Teleportation Equations, and if that was elementary, give him something complicated. Nothing added up at all. He pushed back from the metal dolly and rose shakily, supporting himself with his left hand on the bed. I, he said in a determined voice, am going to get out of here. There is no sense in just waiting around for the sky to fall in on us. Where's me shirt? This was something new. The colonel went over to help Johnny stand, and Johnny brushed him away. He could stand by himself. Chrissy turned around in a flurry and opened 3 or 4 of the wrong bureau drawers. The colonel picked up a handful of assorted canes and sticks that stood in the corner and knocked half of them down. The sentry ordered to report any unusual happenings to Robert the Fox, got on the radio phone right away. Johnny chose a knobcherry, McKendrick, and I had him practicing with a lot of different canes. It was difficult and a bit different because both his right arm and right leg were seemingly useless. It's rather ironic because in real life my left side is pretty much useless. And carrying his stick in his left hand, hopping on the left leg, didn't really work very well. The knobcherry had been brought in as a gift from a chief in Africa who didn't know Johnny was crippled. The black wooden stick was beautifully carved. They used them as a throwing weapon as well as a cane. There must be big men down there, because it was the right length. It also had a very comfortable palm grip. Johnny hobbled over to the bureau and half sat on it and got rid of the military hospital robe. Chrissy had found 3 buckskin shirts and some, with a bit of perverseness, she made him select the oldest and greasiest one. He got it overhead and let her lace up the thongs across the front of it. He got into some buckskin pants and Chrissy helped him on with a pair of moccasins. He struggled with a drawer and got it open. One of the shoemakers had made him a left-handed holster and had more properly fitted the old gold belt buckle to a wide belt. He put them on over the shirt. The holster had a .45 Magnum Smith & Wesson with radiation slugs. He lifted it out and laid it on the drawer and got out a small blast gun, made sure it was charged and dropped it into the holster. At the colonel's odd look, said, I'm not going to kill any silos today. He was engaged in stuffing his right hand into the belt to keep it out of the way, and that arm just tended to dangle so he couldn't use it, when an uproar broke out in the passageway. Johnny was intent on leaving, so he gave it little heed. It would just be Robert the Fox or the parson rushing over to fuss on him and more bollocks about council business. But it wasn't. The door burst open and the base officer of the day, a big middle-aged Scot in a miniskirt and claymore, a man named Captain Macduff, rushed in. "Johnny, sir," said Macduff. Johnny had a definite impression that they were objecting to his leaving, and he wasn't going to be impolite when the captain spluttered the rest of the message. "Johnny, sir, did you send for a silo?" Johnny was looking for a fur cap to wear. They shaved off half his hair for those bloody operations, and he felt like a singed puma, bareheaded, and let the import of the question hit him. He got on the knob cherry and unsteadily hitched forward and peered out the door. There stood Kerr. In the glaring mine lamps out there, he was a very bedraggled creature. Kerr's fur was massive with all the filth that was clinging to it. His fangs seen through the faceplate were yellow and stained. His tunic was all ripped down one side, and he had on only the one boot, not even a cap. Even his ear bones looked messed up. They had put 4 chains on him and a soldier at the end of each chain. It looked so done upon this midget silo. Midget, but still 7 feet tall. Poor Curl. "Did you send for him, Johnny, sir?" "Bring him in here." I'll lean back at the bureau, and he felt amusement mingled with pity. "Do you think that's wise?" But he still waved them forward. Johnny told the soldiers to drop the ends of the chains and leave. 4 more soldiers he hadn't noticed. They backed up, but their assault rifles were trained on Kerr. He told them all to leave. The colonel was flabbergasted. Chrissy wrinkled her nose. What a stink! She had to clean the air out of the whole place. No one wanted to go, and Johnny saw pleading look through Kerr's breathe mask. He waved them all out, and it was the enormous reluctance that they closed the door. "I had to tell the lie," said Kerr. "I just had to see you, Johnny." "You sure you haven't put a comb to yourself lately?" "It's a devil's cauldron they've got me in. I'm half crazed these days. I dropped from his planet ship down to gooey dirt shit, Johnny. I got only one shaft, mate, and that was your shaft up my mate, Johnny. I know how or why you got yourself here, but it's this." Curl dove a dirty paw into his shirt pocket, oblivious of the fact that a more nervous Johnny might have shot him on sight. Johnny could draw, but he's a bit trifle slower these days with his left hand. But Johnny knew Kerr. Held before Johnny's eyes was a banknote. He took it with some curiosity, and he'd only seen these at a distance in the hands of silos paying off wagers, and he'd never actually held them before. He knew they were a basic symbol of exchange or greatly valued. It was about 6 inches wide and a foot long. The paper felt a bit rough, and it seemed to glow slightly. One side of it was printed in blue and the other side in orange. It had a nebular pattern and bright starburst on it. But the remarkable thing was that it was worded in what must be 30 languages. 30 numeral systems, 30 different types of lettering. One of them was silent. Johnny could read that. It read, "The Galactic Bank. 100 galactic credits. And guaranteed legal tender for all the transactions. Counterfeiters will be vaporized. Certified exchangeable at the Galactic Bank upon presentation." It had a picture of somebody or something on the blue side. It looked like a humanoid or maybe a toe-nips. Somebody mistaken for donating for at one point, or maybe, who knew? The face was very dignified. The very portrait of integrity. On the reverse, it has a similar-sized picture of an imposing building with innumerable arches. All very interesting, but Johnny had determined to do other things today. He gave it back to Kerr and started to fish out his own cap again. He felt sort of embarrassed with such a shaved head. Kerr looked a little bit let down. "That's 100 credits! It's not a silo bank. The silos and everybody else use those. It's not counterfeit, I can tell. See how close? And these little fine lines around here, around the signature. Are you trying to bribe me or something?" He discarded one cap and picked up a bandana, but that wasn't much good. "No! Look, this money is no good to me now, Johnny, look." Johnny propped himself up more comfortably on the bureau edge, and he obediently had a look. Kerr, with a glance at the door to make sure he had his back to it, and that only Johnny could see, dramatically threw aside his lapels and pulled the tattered tunic apart. There was a brand upon his chest. Wow, and there's some vodka in my belly. Wow. The three bars of denial, says Kerr. The criminal scourge. I don't think it's any news to you that I was a criminal. That's one of the holds Turl had on me. That's why he felt he could trust me to run around and teach you. If I was ever returned to asylum, I've been found to have false papers and employment, I'll be vaporized on the spot. If Silo can capture this place, they'd be sure those of us alive were renegades. And they'd examine us and find this. My papers are false, just like fucking Jordan's tits. I wouldn't burden you with my real name. Not knowing it, you can't be hit as an accessory. You got it. Johnny didn't have it at all, especially since Silos would kill him on sight and would not be troubled at all about him being an accessory. He nodded. All this wasn't getting anywhere. Where had Chrissy put the bloody bandanas they found? And if in addition they found 2 billion galactic credits on me, they'd do a slow vaporization. 2 billion? Yes, well, it seemed that old Nymph had been screwing the company for the whole 30 years of his duty tour. Things not even Turl had dug up. Things like commissions from the female administration who charged for shagging. Things like double prices on Cabango. Maybe even selling ore to aliens who picked it up in spaceships. Who knew? But Nymph slept on 4 mattresses, and Kerr thought it was a bit funny because he crinkled when he laid on them. And he liked only having the one mattress, him being an ex-con. So he ripped open one end, and there it was. Where? Says Johnny. You're? The midget Silo closed his coat and beckoned Johnny. And the guard went to the door window, and Kurt darted out through the hallway, loose chains dragging, alarming everybody out there, and came back in lugging a big box, which he dumped. Then he rushed out and got another box. Though a midget and only a bit taller than Johnny, Kerr was very strong. Before anybody stopped him, and despite the flapping chains, Kerr shortly had the room bulging with old Cabango boxes, and every one of them overflowing with galactic credits. There's more in his number the cat's on Silo, says Kerr, but we can't get that. He stood there panting and a big smile and very proud of himself. Now you can pay the renegades like Danchenko's in cash. Captain Macduff had been trying to tell Johnny they checked the boxes whilst they were making sure there were no explosives and still asking what all this crap was, all the while wanting to know how Johnny had sent a message to the compound without it being known to the sentries, and was everything all right? And did he do the right thing by bringing Kerr? He was flustered. He had his Silo running around flapping chains, and Johnny was laughing. And you want, says Johnny to Kerr? I want out of prison. They hate me because I was over them. They hated me anyway, Johnny. I know machines. Didn't I teach you to run every machine there is? Even that massive dildo that Chirk loves? I heard that they have a machine school over there at what you call the academy. They don't know nothing about machines like I do. Not like you and me. Let me go and help teach them, like I taught you. He stood there looking so pathetic, so desperate, pleadingly in his expression. He was so convinced he had done the right thing that Johnny just laughed and laughed, and shortly Kerr's mouth bones started to grin. I think it's a great idea, Kerr. At that moment he looked up to the door and saw a very rusty Robert the Fox in his miniskirt standing in the doorway, and Johnny shifted to English. Sir Robert, I think we have a new instructor for the schoolmaster. It's true, he is a great machine operator, and he knows them all. He smiled at Kerr and said in Silo, terms of employment, quarter Cabango a day, full pay plus bonuses, standard company contract. I'm missing only burial on Silo. Is that all right? He knew very well Kerr probably had buried a few 100,000 credits of his own. Kerr started bobbing his head, and pathetically he had held a few 100,000 back for a rainy day. He held out a paw to bash paws with Johnny. That done, He was about to leave when he turned and came very close to Johnny, speaking with a silo equivalent of a whispering. "I got one more thing for you, Johnny. They put that turtle in a cage. You watch, turtle. He's up to summit." When the magic silo had left, Robert the Fox looked at these bales and bales of money. "Job bribery it is. Comes high these days. Turn it over to council." And he started laughing again. "This is galactic money, isn't it? I'm going to contact a Scot named McAdam at University in Highlands. He knows all about money because he's a thieving bastard." But he was wondering at seeing Johnny dressed. He was more than glad Johnny had cheered up enough, and even though he thought the lad foolhardy for letting the silo so close to him, one rake of those set of claws could cost one half his face. Then he realized Johnny was hobbling forward, going out. He looked his question toward Johnny. "I may not be able to hold the sky up," said Johnny, "but I don't have to wait for it to come down either. I'm headed for the compound." He had to talk to the Chamco brothers. He had heard they were making absolutely no progress on repairing the transshipment stage, and without that, they would never know, they would never find out what happened to Silo. It was a long way to the heliport, and especially long when you only had one working leg and it came on the wrong side. The elevators weren't working and probably never would again. Hobbling along, Johnny had just begun to appreciate what a great job had been done cleaning up this place, when he heard running feet behind him. A sharply barked order in Russian, two men appeared on either side of him, who gripped each other's arms in a chair lift and boosted him into it. They were running with him down the stairs to the heliport. Somebody must have alerted the standby pilot, for he was standing there beside a mined passenger plane, with the passenger door open. "No!" yelled Johnny, and pointed with his good arm at the pilot's side. What do you think he was, a busted-up invalid? Of course, he was a busted-up invalid, but Colonel Ivan popped him up to the pilot door and opened it for him. The two Russians literally threw Johnny into the passenger seat, pilot seat, one of the seats. Who cares? A little confused, the standby pilot started to close the passenger door, but was brushed aside by three Russians, who, out of breath, had come tearing down the stairs. They leaped into the plane with a clatter of assault rifles. Colonel Ivan was magically on the other side of the plane, helping Robert the Fox and the two mini-skirted Scots into the ship, and then got in himself. The pilot was a Swede. He was getting into the co-pilot's seat and saying something in a language Johnny could not understand. Maybe a South African from the mountains of the moon. No, the pockets of whites there among the bunter had been contacted too late for anybody to be fully trained yet. Then he realized the pilot was only there for local runs. Basically a cadet. Johnny wrapped himself up in the seatbelt, pinning down his relatively useless right arm, and looked around at his passengers. The Russians were in baggy red pants, or adults called them trousers, and grey tunics, and were finishing getting into their gear. As he turned, Colonel Ivan ripped the bandana off his head and clapped a round, flat fur cap on him. Johnny took it off to get it on straight and saw a red star set in a golden disc on the front. "We charge!" said Colonel Ivan. Evidently he had worked very hard on his English and fucked it up. Johnny grinned. They sure were an international contingent. Excuse me, vodka and chops. The wide doors had been left open and sunlight streamed in. He sailed the plane out into a beautiful summer's day. Ah, the mountains, majestic in their majesty, the calm against the dark blue sky, the ravines with their black shadows, the trees with a soft dark green. Then there was a bear cantering along a slope, bound on some important errand, no doubt, and a whole herd of big-horned sheep. Ooh, those sheep are always big-horny, looking up at what must now be an ordinary sight of a plane on this route. With his left hand romping on the console, Johnny dropped the ship over the last hills of the eastern slope and down toward the plains. Summer, and evidence of a recent rain, for there were flowers stretching out on an endless horizon to the east, an undulating landscape spotted with browsing herds, seemingly inexhaustible space in which men could live, and maybe the occasional woman. What a beautiful planet! What a lovely planet! Well worth saving. The standby pilot was watching Johnny in awe. He was flying with his left hand and left foot only, better than he himself had ever flipped high with 5 hands. A rider? Johnny darted down in his swoop. Why is it whenever I talk about flying, I sound like a fucking World War I British pilot? There was a rider with baggy pants, a flat black leather hat, a cord rope in his hands. He must be into BDS. Oh, he's gathering up a small herd. A Llanero, Sir Robert the Fox. Certainly Australian. South American, they tend to who's, yeah? Johnny flipped open his window and waved at the Llanero. Waved back. What a stupid word to have for a name. What a beautiful day to be his first day coming out. And there was the compound. What an awful lot of people. It must be 30 or 40 of them looking up toward the ship. Johnny set it down with a lightness that wouldn't have cracked an eggshell. Thank heavens none of that huge mob of people had gotten onto the alert ship before he did. For now they were flooding over toward them. Brown skin, black skin, silk jackets, ragged, homespun, women, men. What an awful lot of people. He opened the plane door and put down the first and fourth fingers of his left hand in his mouth and blew a piercing whistle. Tss! Above the babble, his trained ear heard what he wanted to hear. Hoofs! And there came Windsplitter. I really must get my testicles back. Johnny got out of the security belts and before anyone could interfere, slid to the ground. A trick, seeing as these silo planes ran high cockpits. His right arm got in the way and he shoved the hand in his belt. Windsplitter was nickering and bouncing about, glad to see him, and almost knocked him down with a tossing nose. Let's see that leg, said Johnny, kneeling and trying to get hold of the left front hook that seemed injured on the run down the cliff. But Windsplitter thought he was trying to do a trick Johnny had taught him, to shake hands, and almost reprovingly he hefted his right hoof and offered it, succeeding only in practically knocking Johnny flat. Johnny laughed, "You're right," and he shook the offered hoof. Johnny had worked out how he could mount, and he sprang up, belly down, and threw his left leg over. Really? Yeah, jumped onto a horse just using your left leg. As fast as he could make it, he succeeded because he's Sir Johnny McAshman. He didn't need all this help. Now to ride around and find those confounded cham cows and find out about the delay in this transshipment rig. But people were pressing around the horse. Black faces, brown faces, tan faces, wild faces. Hands touching his moccasins. Hands trying to give him things and other things talking at once. He felt a twinge of kid smiling faces, welcoming faces. It put a trifle of a blot on his day, and if these people only realized it, he might very well be a total failure, and those lovely skies up there might soon go grey with death. His lips tightened. He had better get his own business. Adulation was, if anything, a little embarrassing. Practically as he was strongly felt he had not earned any of it. More hooves, and Colonel Ivan said, Stop being a South African Negro boy. And he started barking Russian at somebody. Leading 6 horses at a dead run, another Russian sprinted up. A bark command, and Colonel Ivan and 4 Russians mounted up, and Sir Robert the Fox was mounting as well. Whee! There must have been a Russian and the horses waiting at the compound. The 2 many-skirted Scots pushed their way through the crowd to either side of Windsplitter's head, and began to gently part the throng. Mustn't part the thong, not in a miniskirt, even if you are Scottish. So Johnny could get going. There must be 50 people down there now. Just as he thought he was going to get moving, a small boy in a miniskirt elbowed his way forward, barefoot and gagging looking, all the way to Windsplitter's head and dropped the lead rope on it. The fuck. His piping voice came out of the hubbub. "Oi, Bitty McLeod! None of these said I had to come and be your page. And even though I'm Scottish, I sound Irish because I can't do a fucking Scottish accent. I am here for you, Sir Johnny." The accent was thick, but the determination and the confidence brooked no rebuke. The small boy started leading Windsplitter toward the compound. Even though Windsplitter guided only with a heel and other signals, Johnny didn't have the heart to say no. Behind him came 5 Russians with long poles, lances in their stirrups. pinions on the poles, assault rifles across their backs. A Leonardo dashed up on a horse and took position with them. A squad of Swedish soldiers rushed into view from the compound and presented arms. Workers were coming out of the compound. A big passenger plane had came to the landing area with 30 Tibetans on a pilgrimage to the compound. Why the fuck do I say Tibetans with an African accent? With the Tibetans coming from the Chinese area, ma. Spilled out and joined the mob. 2 flatbeds rolled up from the fringes with about 40 more people in it from the city. Just to the north of the all tumbled off. Another flatbed tore up from the academy. And Johnny, his horse walking dead slab beyond bit of the cloud, looked over this joyous mob, and they were shouting and waving and cheering. He had never seen so many people since the gathering up in Scotland. There must be 300 people. 300 people. Of course, it was 300 people, and it's a Trump convention that automatically translates to 3 million. White hands, black arms, and pink palms. Yellow hands, yellow, blue jackets, orange dresses, grey clothes, straight blonde hair, brown hair, frizzy black hair, languages, all saying, "Hello, Johnny." He looked up apprehensively at the bright blue sky, and for an instant he was startled by a drone. No, it was a recon drone. They had a lot of them constantly patrolling, watchful for any invader. The voices were a continuous roar. A woman was pushing something into his hand, a bouquet of wildflowers, and she was shouting, "For Chrissy, Governor!" He nodded to thank her, and didn't know what to do with them, so he put them in his belt, like a codpiece. The people of Earth, the hopes rekindled, could rise and be alive again. He felt guilty. So guilty, more guilty than ever. They didn't know he might have failed. Aside from not enjoying adulation, he also felt he certainly didn't deserve it. Not all this. Robert the Fox had walked his horse up beside him. He saw that Johnny was troubled. Sure, troubled Johnny. Johnny didn't want the first day out spoiled, so he said, "Wait them a bit, laddie. Wave to them. Just raise your hand and nod." Johnny did, and the crowd went wild. They had worked their way along the hill towards the Ochinko quarters, and the morgue was just over there. There was a dome behind which used to have his quarters, and where every so often he had stood out in the night. Johnny stared, and there was Tal in a cage with a collar upon his neck. Toes capering and leaping about, a vague unease took Johnny, and he persuaded the Scottish boy to lead him towards it. There was plenty of time. His business with the Chamko brothers was important, but a few minutes would make no difference. He had certainly better see whether he could find out what Tal was up to. The size of the throng was growing. The bulk of the trainees at the academy, when they had heard that Johnny had appeared at the compound, demanded a few hours off instantly, and the schoolmaster, understanding but unable to do bugger all about it anyway, and let them all off, and here they were in a swarm. More people were in for New Denver. All working stopped, and the machines were now deserted in the underground shops at the compound. Several council members, they appeared on the outskirts of the crowd. They included Brilliant Staffer, Wanker, chief of this continent, Wanker. More than 600 people were there now. The din was nearly deafening. Charles saw the animal coming toward the cage, and he capered ever more violently. Johnny saw the area was not much changed or damaged from the Bat Hill. The geysering water had cut a few new furrows in the plateau by its runoff, and a bar or two of the cage was nicked by bullets. Water had tended to wash the cage clean rather than damage it, and he looked up at the connector box in Poland and saw it had been electronically charged in the same way, and the same cables were still being used. Someone had put a barrier of 9 fencing so people could not reach the bars. Yes, it was much the same cage, except that green grass grew in tufts around the perimeter, much like a badly shaven vagina. His attention came away from the crowd How many months had he been inside looking out? How many nights had he been stood outside looking in, like a stalker, at the jailbait? A lot of nightmare was mixed up in that. He wanted to question Tal. He flinched from talking through these bars again. A normal voice volume would not hope to reach him, not with his hub, and he was not about to sit here shouting. He caught the eye of his sentry and beckoned over. But instead of the sentry coming, the compound commander just pushed through toward him. Johnny saw the man was in a gale by his miniskirt, and he leaned over to him to be heard. Would you please turn off that electricity out there and have a guard open that door to the cage? What? Said the compound commander in his establishment. Johnny thought he might not have heard to repeat this request, and then he saw the man was refusing. There was always a little friction between the Argyles and the Clanfaragers. Indeed, it was often erupting in clan warfare at that, so I did. And he recalled that the only last time he had a visit to Scotland was interrupted the last war. Johnny was not going to argue with the man, and he wasn't going to go tell the out Turl through them bars. Rob the Fox looked at Turl in that cage and that Argyle and the crown and connect the box on that pole, and he reached out to check with Johnny. But Johnny had already leaned forward and swung off his horse. Colonel Ivan, breasted with some people at his side and thrust that knob cherry into Johnny's hand. I'm hoping it was that knob cherry and not just his knob something else. Oblin, because it wasn't something else. Johnny made his way toward the exterior pole switch and pulled it open. Having to balance upon the poles with his free hand, he popped open the electrical spark at the bus bar and it opened, and the crowd parted for him when he saw in which direction he was trying to walk. Suddenly they became very quiet. Yes, they did. The silence, starting from where Johnny was going, seemed to wave in a wave to the very outskirts into silence and quietness. The cage sentry had not left his post in all this bird. He carried the door keys on his belt, and Johnny put the keys out of the guard's belt. There was a ripple of excitement, questioning from these people, and then they got tense, and the silence got more. Turl took the opportunity to roar ferociously. The compound commander started to rush forward, but found himself yachted by the huge hand of Colonel Ivan, who had simply leaned down from his horse. The colonel wanted no extra bodies in the field of fire. Them other Cossacks found out abruptly. There was a sharp clatter of assault rifle bolts being cocked, and 4 rifles were levelled at Turl in the cage. Some Scots sprinted to the roofs of the old Chinko cars, and a rush of running feet was replaced by the snicks of rifles being cocked and levelled at Turl. The crowd surged back away from the barriers. Johnny heard the rifle bolts and he turned, speaking in a normal voice, for it was now quiet, except for the roaring of Turl. A bullet could ricochet off these bars and go into that crowd, so please put your guns up. He loosened the blast pistol in his holster, and then after the afterthought, he checked to see that it was cocked on stun and no flame. But he was convinced he was in no danger. Turl had a collar on him, and he was chained, and while it wouldn't be too wise to get within physical reach of them, the only thing Turl would try would be some antic from the apparent mood he was in. The door lock worked more easily than it used to. Somebody must have put some lubrication on it, and everyone knows there's always time for lubrication. He opened it, and there was an intake of breath. From the crowd. Johnny's attention was not for the crowd, mind. Turl roared. Quit clowning, Turl, says Johnny. Turl promptly did and hunkered down against the back wall, his amber eyes evilly amused. Well, hello, animal. The parson's voice rapped out from somewhere in the crowd. He is not an animal. Johnny hadn't realized the parson spoke satire. I see, says Turl, that someone clawed you up. Oh, well, it happens when one is stupid. How'd it happen to you, then? Be civil, Turl. What do you think you're doing in this cage? Oh, a Chinko accent, says Turtle. Try as I would, I could never make you into a polished letter-up being. Very well, if it's courtesy you want, and as you speak Chinko, why, forgive this ignorant intrusion of speech into your lordly earbones. He was going on with a string of the old Chinko abasements, and then he laughed viciously. Answer the questions, Turtle. Why, he said a silent word Johnny had never heard before. Johnny had another purpose in coming in here. He wanted to see what Turtle may have set up that somebody else had missed. He hobbled around the cage, staying wide of Turtle and keeping part of an eye on him. He looked at the inside of the walls. He looked at the bars and the walls and the bars, and he looked into the pool. Turtle had a small pile of things wrapped in a tarpaulin. Johnny motioned with his left hand for Turtle to back up, and he went over to the loose package. He knelt and flipped it open. There was a garment in there, no more than a wraparound. Turtle was wearing another one now, and was otherwise naked. There was a bent cabango saucepan with a hole in it, and no cabango, and a silo dictionary. What on earth was a silo doing with a dictionary? What on earth would the very educated Turtle, well, educated in silo, be doing with a silo dictionary? Johnny backed up out of the reach of the chain, and what was the word Turtle had used? Repenting. The action of being sorrowful or self-reproachful for what one has done or failed to do. A word adopted from the Hockner language and said to be actually experienced by some alien races. Repenting? You? Didn't I put you in a cage? Don't you realise it would have give one feelings of... Johnny had to look at that word up. Guilt. The painful feeling of self-reproach resulting from a conversation that's immoral. Who adopted from the Chinko language and useful to political officers and degrading individuals of subject races. Said by Professor Holtz to factually exist as an emotion in some aliens. He popped the book shut. You must have done some too, animal. After all, I was like a father to you, and I laboured day and night to shatter my future. In fact, I clearly suspect that you just used me so you could betray me. Like the exploding truck. What exploding truck? The delivery flatbed. Oh, I thought you meant that blaze scraper you got yourself trapped in, the one that blew up out there in the plateau. You animals are always so hard on machinery. So here I am, the subject of your revenge. Johnny didn't bother to look up the word. He knew it would be just another one that no real silo would ever use. I didn't order you into this cage, or into that collar. You did. By rights, I should have them, well, down to the dormitory level, kipping around here, half naked. I don't think you will. Why did you come down here today? It was better not to talk too much to Turtle. But if he didn't, he couldn't get him to leak data. I came here to ask the Champa brothers about the delay on the transshipment rig. I rather thought you must have, says Turtle. He seemed indifferent. He heaved a long sigh to breathe mask, and he stood up. The crowd outside drew back with a frightened mutter. The monster was almost 4 feet taller than Johnny. Claws, fangs visible through his mask. Animal, in spite of our past differences, I think I should tell you one thing. You will be coming to me for help soon. And as I am... 2 more words Johnny wouldn't bother to look up. I probably will be stupid enough to help you. So just remember, animal, when it gets too difficult, come and see Turtle. After all, Were we always shaft mates? Didn't I always use lube most of the time? Johnny let out a bark of laughter. This was simply too much. He threw the dictionary over to the tarp and, leaning heavy on his knob cherry, back to Churl. He walked out the cage. The moment he had closed and locked the door, Churl let out a dreadful roar and began prancing around and beating his chest. Johnny threw the keys to the guard and went over to turn the electric back on. He was still laughing to himself as he hobbled away towards Winsflitter. The crowd was way back, making sounds of relief. Not everyone was way back. Brian Lipperstaffer, wanker, was between Johnny and the horse. Johnny recognized him and was about to greet him, then Johnny stopped. He had never before seen such naked, malevolent hatred on anyone's face. I see there are 2 cripples now, said Brian Lipperstaffer, wanker. He abruptly turned his back on Johnny and limped off, his club foot dragging. There were people there who would be telling their great-grandchildren that they personally had been present when the Johnny had gone into that cage, and who would gain no small importance and notoriety because of it. Sad bastards need to get a life. Johnny was on Winspeter again, walking the horse towards the small, isolated dome erected to house the Chamco brothers. That was not well done, says Robert the Fox. Don't scare these people like that. He himself had been worried stiff, which is very obvious when you're wearing a miniskirt. I didn't come to see the people. I came to see the Chamcos, and I'm on my way right now. You have to think of the public presence, said Robert the Fox. That frightened them. This might be Johnny's first day out, and Robert the Fox might be a good deal for him, but that visitor term was in here, he is, Anne. You're a symbol now, he said. Johnny turned toward him. He was very fond of Sir Robert, but he couldn't conceive of himself as a symbol. I'm more of a drum kit. I'm just Johnny Goodboy McCashman. He suddenly laughed in a kindly way. That is to say, McCashman. Any concern Sir Robert had felt melted. What could you do with this laddie? Bend him over, get a slab of lube. Why? He was glad the day seemed a happy one again, at least to Johnny. The crowd was much more subdued, but it still followed. Colonel Ivan had gotten over his fright and had his lance-bearing Cossacks in formation. Biddy MacLeod, who is about 8 years old, had successfully swallowed his heart and was leading in the direction Winspeter seemed to be pointing him. The Argyle in command. It is an adorable thing to think. You've got this full-grown adult horse that's probably about 12 foot tall, and it's like two and a half, 3 foot tall little kid in a miniskirt leading him along. It's really, really sad, and I get teared up whenever I think about the little shit. If you've never read the book, whoa! The Argyle in command of the compound sneaked a quick and needed one from a flask, then handed it to a second in command. Johnny sized up the separate dome ahead. Well, they'd done very well by the Chamco brothers. They had salvaged a dome canopy and from some mine shafts that were not working anymore, and they'd raised it on a concrete circle. Its atmosphere lock was one of the better ones, a transparent resolved revolver valve that spinning door to keep the breathe gas in and the air gas out. There was a separate breathe gas tank and pump. The transparent dome had shades and they were now open, but despite the sun's heat, solids didn't seem to care much about heat and cold. Here the Chamcos were busy with plans and suggestions in return for pay. That could be paid now in cash thanks to Curl's discovery of galactic credits. Johnny knew them from his training days around the mine site. They were top-grade design and planning engineers, graduates from all the accepted silo academies and the company schools. By report, they were extremely cooperative and even polite. Well, as polite as any silo can ever be, which was not really very much. Their idea of politeness was basically a one-way direction, toward them. They could be seen in there now, working at 2 big upholstered desks flanked by drawing boards. There was even an intercom of the usual type, so one could stand outside and talk to those inside without going in through the lock. But Johnny could not imagine trying to have a talk on technical matters through one of those bloody intercoms. Colonel Ivan must have read his mind, and he pushed forward and said in his limited English, "You ski, go ski, in ski, there ski." Then he looked around wildly for a coordinator who spoke Russian. The coordinator interpreted. "He says there's bulletproof glass in that canopy. He can't cover you with the rifles." Rob the Fox said somewhat desperately, "Have you been out for enough for your first day? This is what I came here to do." Johnny hopped off Winspisser. Doubtfully, Colonel Ivan handed him his knob tureen at the same time, trying to get the interpreter to translate. Fireworks going off. Possible riot. The colonel says not to stand in the way of the airlock. Try to go inside and move to the right. If you don't, his men won't be able to charge in. Hobbling towards the atmosphere lock, Johnny heard the crowd behind him saying things like, "He's going in there too. Doesn't he realize he's siloed? Oh, look at those awful beasts in there." Johnny didn't like all the impending his actions. That being a symbol had its problems. It was an entirely new idea to him that he couldn't move around freely of his own discretion, and that others would have to have a say where he was going and what he was doing. He guessed the Chamco brothers usually had their canopy curtains closed, because even though the curtains were now open, they had lights burning. He put on an air mask, and a pilot handed it to him. Johnny hobbled through the atmosphere lock, and experiencing a bit of trouble with it. These locks built for silos were, well, they were always a bit clumsy for him, too heavy and too hard to push. The Chamcos had stopped working and were just sitting still, looking at him. They were not in any way hostile, and they didn't greet him. "I came to see what progress you are making on the rebuilding of the transshipment rig." He's trying to be polite, and they didn't say anything. Was the smaller Chamco brother looking a little bit wary? "If you want any materials or anything, just, I'd be happy to see they're furnished for you." The bigger Chamco said, "The whole rig was burnt out, the console, everything. Destroyed." "Well, yeah, he's leaning on his claim in front of the atmosphere lock, but I'm sure they're just common components. There's miniature rigs in all these freighters. They're not too dissimilar." "Very difficult," said the smaller brother. Were his eyes a little bit strange, or is that just a silo being a silo? "We ought to rebuild it. We ought to know what really happened to Silo. We won't know until we do." "Takes a lot of time." Were his eyes looking strange as well? But then the amber ores of a silo were always a little bit... They always had tiny flames in them. "I've been trying to figure all this out, you see," says Johnny. He looked over to the side where they had some textbooks. Right at the end there was one he had thrown down this morning. "If you could explain it to me." The smaller Chanco sprang. The bigger Chanco leapt from his desk and charged. They were roaring. Johnny stumbled backwards. The cane was in the... He couldn't draw. The stick was in the way. He threw it at the nearest Chamco. It was a weak throw, and he was never left-handed. He saw an almost paw blurring in the air coming toward him. He knelt and did a left-handed draw. Talons raked the side of his face, and Johnny fired. The recoil fired him back against the door. He tried to push into the atmosphere lock. It was jammed, frozen. Flat on his back, a boot stamped down to crush his ribs. He fired from the floor. The boot blurred away. A flurry of paws were coming towards his throat. The roars were berserk. Johnny fired at the paws and then at the huge chest. He punched blast after blast into them, driving them back. Somehow he got to his knee. The two falling gigantic bodies were falling back, falling down. Johnny fired again at one and then at the other. Both of them were flat on the floor. The smaller Chamco brother was thoroughly stunned, but just beyond him, the bigger one. He was fighting with a desk drawer. He got it open and pulled something out. It all happened so fast that Johnny could not see what it was, and because of the angle of the desk, he couldn't make it out. He moved sideways to get a clearer shot. The bigger Chamco had a small blast gun, but he wasn't trying to aim it at Johnny. He was aiming at his own head. He was trying to commit suicide. The howling maelstrom of action had passed, and Johnny coolly aimed and blew the gun out of the bigger Chamco's hand. It didn't explode. Part of the blast had hit the silo, and he flopped back, knocked out. Damn not having a right hand and arm. He couldn't at once recover his cane. He hopped sideways and leaned against the canopy wall. Smoke was thick in the room, curling around the breathed gas exhaust vents. He was half deaf from the roaring and snarling and the blast of the guns in his confined space. Wow, what was that all about? There they lay. But why the attack? The atmosphere locked door resolved, and Colonel Ivan and a sentry burst through. Don't fire those rifles, for fuck's sake. This is breathed gas, and radiation will blow us to bits. Get some shackles. We couldn't find air masks, Ski. The guard was hysterical, and he tore out to find shackles. Colonel Ivan adjusted his own air mask and hitched a better look at the two silos, sprawled upon the floor. They looked like they were out, but Johnny still had a blast gun on them. He gestured at the breathe masks on the silos and where they were hung by a coda tree. Colonel Ivan grabbed them and put them on the unconscious Chamcos. Johnny gestured at the breathe gas circulator controls, and Colonel Ivan went to them and shut them off. And then, with a lot of battering and a huge strength, he got the atmosphere lock folded back on itself, flooding air into the place. Sentries could finally rush in, chains and shackles rattling and clanging, and get them onto the Chamcos. Johnny hobbled outside. Only then did he realize the crowd had been there and had seen all this through the canopy glass. Some were pointing at his face, and he realized for the first time that he was bleeding. Num, num, num. He hobbled to a wind-splitter and mounted. The crowd was talking to one another, and guards were trying to work. Why did he attack the silos? They attacked him. Why did they fight? Look out, here comes a flatbed and a forklift. Please stand aside. I don't blame Johnny for shooting silos. Could we have some help with these Hooks bodies? Why did they let him go in there? Why did they attack him? How could he attack them? I have heard they'd been in silos, but he saw them. He's being very pleasant, and they attacked him. Why would they do that? Johnny didn't have a bandana or a scrap of buckskin to stop the blood dripping from down his hunting shirt. Some mechanic handed him a wad of waste, and he held it to his cheek. They were supposed to be tame silos. Why did they attack him? Johnny surely wished that he knew. What had he said? He had a sudden thought. He called out. Did anybody get a recording of that? The conversation must have been coming through the intercom. But must have been about 15 picture recorders using up discs ever since he had stepped off the plane. And our guy all rushed up waving one. Could somebody copy that for me? I need to know what was said that made them do it. Oh, yes, sir, right away, sir. And they had copies of it before he hoisted himself off Winspeter and back onto the plane. He was going to study these. Wave, says Robert the Fox. Johnny waved, and the crowd was looking at him, some with quite white faces. Even their black faces were turning a bit grey. Hey, racist! Please stand back from the guards. Clear the fields, please. Back at the base that night, just after dinner, Colonel Ivan got a coordinator in. The coordinator said, he wants me to tell you that you live too dangerously. There might have been more, but Johnny cut him off. Tell him, perhaps at heart, I'm just a Cossack. The Russians laughed about that, repeating it for days and days thereafter. It had been a rather energetic first day out. There was a bit of repercussion, though. 3 days later, he received a confidential written message from the council. He did not think much about it at the time, not being unduly sensitive. Later he would look back on it as a turning point and criticize himself for not realizing just how ominous it was. The message was correct, very polite, passed by a slim majority. It was brief. By council resolution in the interest of his personal safety and to curtail any embarrassment, realizing his value to the state, it is decreed that Johnny Goodbye Tyler not again visit the compound located in this place until such prohibition is formally rescinded by constituted authority, duly passed on voice vote and certified as legal. Oscar, some Jewish name, Chief of the Tribe of the British Columbia, Secretary to the Council. Johnny read it, shrugged, and tossed it into a wastebasket.